My mother-in-law handed me a candy cane. Not a gift. Not a wrapped present from under the tree like everyone else got. A candy cane from the bowl on the coffee table. The kind you buy in bulk at the grocery store for $2. She pressed it into my palm with both hands like she was bestowing something precious and said, "Sorry, sweetheart, I only buy gifts for blood relatives, but Merry Christmas anyway." The room went quiet. James's sister Meredith looked at her lap. His father pretended to adjust an ornament on the tree. James, my husband, was in the kitchen getting drinks. He hadn't heard. I looked at that candy cane, then at the pile of presents Linda had brought. A cashmere sweater for Meredith, a new watch for her husband Greg, a gaming console for their son Tyler. For James, her precious firstborn, a leather jacket that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. For me, the woman who'd been married to her son for 3 years, a piece of striped sugar worth approximately 3 cents. I smiled back at her. "Thank you, Linda. This is very thoughtful." Then I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope. "I almost forgot. This is for you." She looked confused. Took the envelope. Opened it. Her face went pale. "What is this?" "The electric bill. $437, due on the 3rd. I kept smiling. "Sorry. I only pay utilities for blood relatives." The room went dead silent. James walked in with a tray of drinks, saw everyone's faces, saw his mother holding the bill like it was a live snake. "What's going on?" Linda's voice came out strangled. "Your wife just handed me an electric bill." James set down the tray slowly. "Mom, you told me you were paying that. You said you wanted to contribute since you moved in." Linda said nothing. Her mouth opened and closed. "She wasn't," I said quietly. "She hasn't paid a single bill in 7 months. I have the bank statements if you'd like to see them." James looked at his mother, really looked at her, and I saw something shift in his face that I'd been waiting 3 years to see. Here's the thing about being the invisible daughter-in-law. You learn to disappear so gradually that you don't even notice it's happening. You give up space at the dinner table. You give up opinions in conversations. You give up the right to exist in your own home without apologizing for taking up room. And then, one day, you realize you've become a ghost in your own life, and the only person who seems to see you is the one who made you invisible in the first place. Let me take you back, because this story isn't about a candy cane or an electric bill. It's about 3 years of being told I didn't count, and the moment I finally proved that I did. If you've ever had someone treat you like you didn't belong in your own family, if you've ever smiled through humiliation because fighting back felt worse than swallowing it, this story is for you. I met James at a coffee shop when I was 22. He accidentally knocked my phone out of my hand, spent 20 minutes apologizing, bought me coffee, and asked for my number. By year's end, I was in love. James was everything I'd hoped for. Kind, steady, the kind of man who remembered small things. He had a good job in finance, a nice apartment, and a family he described as close. I didn't know yet that close could also mean suffocating. I met Linda 6 months in. James was nervous, which should have been a red flag. "She's protective," he said. I wore my nicest dress, brought flowers and wine. Linda opened the door and looked me up and down before saying hello. "You're shorter than I expected," she said. "Not nice to meet you. Just an observation that made me feel insufficient." Dinner was an interrogation. My parents were divorced, she noted with a frown. I grew up in Ohio. Apparently not impressive. My career in marketing was creative, but not stable. I wanted children eventually, but not immediately, which prompted a lecture about fertility. By dessert, I felt like I'd failed an exam I hadn't known I was taking. We got engaged when I was 24. James proposed on a hiking trail in Colorado, just the two of us. I said yes before he finished the question. When we called his parents to share the news, I heard Linda's voice through the phone. Already? Are you sure you've thought this through? James said yes. He was sure. Linda said she hoped so. No one asked to talk to me. Wedding planning was a battlefield. Linda had ideas about everything. When I chose a dress she hadn't approved, she called James to say I was being difficult. During the reception, I overheard her telling friends she gave us 3 years tops. James came from good stock. He'd realize his mistake. I was standing close enough to hear every word. She knew. She didn't care. Our first year of marriage was good. We found an apartment we loved in a nice neighborhood. I got promoted at work. Linda visited occasionally, finding something to criticize each time. The apartment was too small. The neighborhood was questionable. My cooking was interesting. But she lived 45 minutes away, and the distance made her manageable. I told myself it would get better with time. It got worse. James's father, Robert, had a stroke when we'd been married 18 months. He survived but needed care. Linda, suddenly a caretaker at 56, was overwhelmed. James offered to help with finances, logistics, whatever she needed. What she needed, apparently, was to move in with us. Just for a few months, James said. Until Dad's in rehab and she can figure out the house situation. I wanted to say no. I wanted to say that living with Linda would destroy me. But Robert was in the hospital and James was scared and this was his family. So I smiled and said, "Of course. Family helps family. That's what we do." The few months became 6 months, then a year. Robert recovered enough to move to an assisted living facility. The house sold. Linda used the money for vague investments that never seemed to generate returns. Meanwhile, she stayed in our guest room, ate our food, used our utilities, and reminded me daily that I was a guest in my own home. The food games started immediately. Linda cooked elaborate meals for James every night, filling the kitchen with warmth and the message that I wasn't needed. When I offered to help, she'd smile and say, "Oh, that's sweet, but I've got it. Why don't you go relax?" When I cooked on nights she was out, she'd take one bite, push the plate away, say she wasn't very hungry. "Oh, you attempted lasagna. How brave." I stopped cooking altogether by month 3. The gift disparity was calculated. First Christmas with Linda in residence. James got a designer watch worth at least $1,000. I got a candle from the sale section at Target, price tag still visible. "I didn't know what you'd like," she said. "You're so particular." Second Christmas, James got a weekend trip to a golf resort. I got a gift card to a seafood restaurant. I'm allergic to shellfish. When I mentioned it, Linda looked surprised. "Oh, I forgot about that. Maybe James can take someone who appreciates seafood." Someone who appreciates seafood. Like my allergy was a character flaw. The comments were constant. Small enough to deny, frequent enough to wound. My hair looked different. My clothes were youthful. I was spending a lot of time at work lately, wasn't I? She hoped I wasn't neglecting James. She'd seen articles about young wives who prioritized careers over their marriages. Hadn't ended well. Every observation was a tiny cut, and I was bleeding from 1,000 of them. Have you ever felt like you were fading away in your own life? Like every day, another piece of you gets edited out until you don't recognize yourself anymore? That was me by year 2 of Linda's residency. I'd stopped inviting friends over because Linda would insert herself into every conversation. I'd stopped suggesting restaurants because Linda would veto anything that wasn't her preference. I'd stopped talking at dinner because Linda would interrupt or talk over me until I gave up. I was 26 years old, married to a man I loved, and I felt more alone than I had in my entire life. And then I got pregnant. It wasn't planned, exactly. But it wasn't not planned either. James and I had talked about kids. Someday. Eventually. When we were ready. Apparently, someday was November of our second year of marriage. I took the test 3 times because I didn't believe it. Called my doctor. Got the blood work. 8 weeks pregnant. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the medical building and cried for 20 minutes. Happy tears. Terrified tears. Everything tears. Telling James was one of the best moments of my life. His face went through shock, then fear, then joy so pure it made me cry again. We decided to wait until 12 weeks to tell anyone, just to be safe, just to make sure. At 12 weeks, the ultrasound showed a healthy baby, strong heartbeat, everything developing normally. We told our families that weekend. My mother cried. My father said congratulations and asked if we needed money, which was his way of saying he cared. James's family gathered for a dinner announcement. Robert, now in a wheelchair but mentally sharp, smiled and said he couldn't wait to be a grandpa. Meredith hugged me and said she was excited to be an aunt. Linda was quiet through the whole dinner. When James made the announcement, she didn't smile. Just nodded and said, "Well, that's certainly news." Later in the kitchen, she found me alone. I was washing dishes. She stood beside me, drying a glass with deliberate slowness. "You know this changes things," she said. I didn't look at her. "I hope so, in good ways. James is going to need to focus on his career, on providing. You're going to need to step up." She set down the glass. "This isn't going to be easy for you, Chelsea. Motherhood is demanding. I hope you're prepared." I kept washing. "I think I'm as prepared as anyone can be." She picked up another glass. "We'll see." That was her congratulations. "We'll see." Like she was waiting for me to fail. The next 4 weeks were a blur of appointments, vitamins, baby books, and hope so fierce it felt physical. I looked at nursery furniture. James and I argued about names. For the first time since Linda moved in, I had something she couldn't diminish. I was going to be a mother. I was going to matter. At 16 weeks, I started bleeding. I was at work when the cramping started. By the time I got to the hospital, I knew. You always know. The ultrasound confirmed it. No heartbeat. The doctor used words like spontaneous and nothing you could have done and unfortunately common. James held my hand so hard I had bruises for a week. We went home with empty arms and an emptier future. The physical recovery took a week. The emotional recovery is still ongoing. I've never felt pain like that. Like something was ripped out of me and the wound was invisible but bleeding constantly. James was devastated too. We grieved together, held each other, cried ourselves to sleep for nights on end. It was the worst thing I'd ever experienced. And into that rawness walked Linda. She came to our bedroom door 3 days after the miscarriage. I was in bed, hadn't showered, hadn't eaten much. James was downstairs making soup he knew I wouldn't touch. Linda knocked once and entered without waiting for an answer. "Chelsea." She stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed. "I know this is difficult, but I think we need to talk." I pulled myself up against the pillows. "Linda, I'm not really... I'll be quick." She looked at me with something that might have been pity, but felt more like assessment. "Maybe this is for the best. You weren't ready anyway. Neither of you, really. You're both so young. And bringing a child into this situation, with the finances the way they are, with you still figuring out your career." She shook her head. "Maybe this was God's way of saying not yet." I stared at her. The words didn't make sense at first. My baby had died. My baby had died, and she was standing there telling me it was for the best. Get out. Chelsea, I'm just being realistic. Get out of my room. She left. I heard her go downstairs, heard murmured conversation with James, heard something about me being hormonal and not thinking clearly. I lay there staring at the ceiling, her words running through my head on repeat. Maybe it's for the best. You weren't ready anyway. I didn't tell James what she said. I couldn't. The words were stuck somewhere deep, sharp and poisonous, and too painful to bring into the light. He was grieving too. He loved his mother. So I swallowed it, added it to the pile, smiled when I came downstairs, watched Linda pat my hand with satisfaction and tell me everything would be fine. That was 12 months before the Christmas with the candy cane. 12 months of carrying those words like a stone in my chest. 12 months of watching Linda continue to live in my home, treat me like an inconvenience, and take credit for contributions she never made. 12 months of me getting smaller and smaller while pretending I was fine. But something changed after the miscarriage. Not immediately, not dramatically, just a quiet shift, like a crack forming in ice. I stopped caring quite as much about keeping the peace. I started writing things down, dates, incidents, numbers. Every time Linda said something cutting, every time she undermined me, every time she claimed to be contributing while actually taking. The electric bill was almost an accident. James and I had divided household finances. He handled the mortgage and insurance. I handled utilities and groceries. When Linda moved in, she'd offered to take over the electric bill as her contribution. "It's the least I can do," she'd said. James was grateful. I was skeptical. But I let it go because fighting about it would have made me difficult. For the first few months, I assumed she was paying. Then our power got shut off on a Thursday in July. Just suddenly, no electricity. I called the power company, confused, certain there'd been a mistake. There hadn't. The account was 8 months past due. Over $2,000 owed. I paid it. Used our emergency fund. Didn't tell James because I was still figuring out what to do. When he came home and asked why I looked stressed, I said work was difficult. When Linda commented that the air conditioning seemed to be working better lately, I smiled and said nothing. I started monitoring. Secretly, I could see the account online, could see the payments, or lack thereof. Every month, I'd check. Every month, nothing. Linda would mention over dinner that bills were getting so expensive. James would agree. I'd nod. And inside, I'd add another note to my file. By December, she owed $437 on top of what I'd quietly covered. I'd saved every statement, every record of her non-payment, every lie she told James about contributing. The night before Christmas Eve, I sat in my car outside our apartment for an hour, hands shaking, heart pounding. Wondering if I was really going to do this. Wondering if it made me a bad person. Wondering if James would hate me for forcing his hand. Then I remembered Linda standing at the foot of my bed. "You weren't ready anyway." And I walked inside with the envelope in my purse. What would you do if someone told you you weren't family while living in your house, eating your food, running up bills they claimed to be paying? Would you keep smiling? Or would you finally fight back? The 3 days after Christmas were chaos. James saw the bank statements. 7 months of unpaid electric bills. Receipts showing I'd covered over $2,000 that Linda had sworn she was handling. His face went through confusion, denial, anger, hurt. Finally, something like disgust. "Mom," he said, still holding the papers. "What the hell?" Linda was crying, pretty, practiced tears. "I was going to pay it back. I've been having cash flow issues. The investments. What investments? You have Dad's pension and Social Security. Where is that money going? She didn't have a good answer. Each excuse crumbled under the weight of the evidence. 7 months, $2,000. Lies. But the electric bill wasn't the real explosion. That came 3 days later. Family meeting in our living room. James and me, Linda, Meredith and Greg, who'd come because James had called. Linda sat on the couch like a defendant awaiting sentencing. She'd written a check that morning for the full amount. She thought it was over. "Mom," James said, exhausted. "This can't continue. You living here, the lying. Chelsea and I have been talking. This is her doing." Linda pointed at me. "She's been waiting for this. Waiting for an excuse to turn you against me." "No one turned me against you. You lied to me for 7 months. I made a mistake. Is she really going to destroy our family over a few $100s? It was $2,000, Mom. Which I paid back. Why are we still discussing this?" I'd been silent through the exchange, sitting in the corner, watching. I hadn't planned what I said next. The words just came out. Like they'd been pressed down so long they couldn't stay down anymore. "Tell him what you said to me. After the miscarriage." The room went silent. Linda's face went pale. "I don't know what you're—" 3 days after I lost our baby. You came to our bedroom. You told me maybe it was for the best. That I wasn't ready anyway. James turned to me slowly. "What?" She said maybe God was telling us not yet. That bringing a child into our situation wouldn't have been good. My voice was shaking, but I couldn't stop. "I was 3 days post-miscarriage, and your mother told me my baby dying was for the best." Linda was standing now, hands raised. "That's not what I was trying to comfort her." "Tell him the exact words, Linda. Maybe it's for the best. You weren't ready anyway. I was trying to help you see the silver lining. My baby died. There was no silver lining." James was on his feet. I'd never seen that look on his face. Never. Like something was breaking apart inside him in real time. "Mom, did you say that to her?" "James, honey." She was emotional. "Did you say that to my wife 3 days after she lost our child?" Silence. The answer. Meredith had her hand over her mouth. Robert, watching via video call, had tears streaming down his face. "Get out." James's voice was quiet. Absolutely quiet. "Get out of our house." "James, you have 1 week to find somewhere else to live. I'll help you move. But you're not staying here. Not after this." Linda tried everything. Tears, anger, appeals to family loyalty, to blood, to the years she'd raised him. She said I'd poisoned him, manipulated him. James listened to all of it. Then he said, "My wife lost our baby and you told her it was for the best. There's nothing you can say that makes that okay." She was gone within the week. Moved to an apartment complex 20 minutes away, a nice enough place with amenities for her age. James helped with the deposit, hired movers, made sure she was settled. He was still her son. But something fundamental had shifted. The months after Linda left were quiet. Good quiet. The kind where you can breathe in your own home without wondering who's going to criticize your breathing. James and I went to couples counseling for a while, untangling years of dynamics I'd never fully explained. I told him everything. Every cutting comment, every dismissal. Every time I'd smiled through humiliation because fighting back seemed impossible. He listened, apologized for not seeing it sooner. "You got so quiet after she moved in," he said during one session. "I thought you were just adjusting. I didn't realize you were disappearing." "I didn't realize it either," I said. "Not until there was almost nothing left." We renewed our vows on our 4th anniversary. Small ceremony, Just us and a few close friends. Meredith reached out after that Christmas to apologize for years of not seeing what Linda was doing. I knew she was hard on you. I just didn't know how hard. I forgave her. Linda and I don't speak now, not directly. She sends birthday cards with generic messages. I send thank you notes that say nothing. When we're at the same family events, rare now, we're polite, in the way strangers are polite. She tried once to apologize, called me on a random Tuesday. I've been thinking about what I said. After your loss, I want you to know I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I let her finish. Then I said, "Thank you for calling, Linda. I hope you're doing well." And I hung up. Some apologies come too late to matter. I'm 29 now. James and I bought a house last spring. A real house with a yard and room to grow. We're trying again, carefully, with better doctors and more support. No guarantees, but hope. Sometimes I think about that candy cane, the one Linda pressed into my palm like a consolation prize for not being blood. I kept it, weirdly. It's in a drawer in my desk, still in its wrapper. Maybe as a reminder of how small I let myself become, of the moment I decided to stop shrinking. Linda said I wasn't family, said she only bought for blood relatives. But here's what she didn't understand. Family isn't about blood. It's about showing up. It's about choosing someone again and again, even when it's hard. James shows up. Every single day. Linda lived in my house for 2 years and never once saw me as a person. That's not family. That's just genetics wearing a familiar face. My mother-in-law told me I wasn't ready to be a mother. 3 days after I lost my baby, she stood at my bedside and told me maybe it was for the best. She thought that would break me. For a while, it did. But broken things can be rebuilt. Sometimes they come back stronger. And sometimes the person who tried to break you ends up being the one who taught you how much you could survive. If you've ever had someone make you feel like you didn't belong in your own family, this is for you. If you've ever carried words so sharp you couldn't speak them for months, this is for you. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe anyone forgiveness they haven't earned. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is finally tell the truth and let the people who love you decide what to do with it. Tell me in the comments, has anyone ever said something so cruel you couldn't repeat it for months or years? What happened when you finally did? I read every story. Subscribe for more about people who stopped accepting candy canes and started demanding a seat at the table. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's an envelope with a bill inside and the quiet words, "I'm done pretending."